Hi, my name is Dr. Ola Brown, and I'm going to be talking about a question that I get asked all the time. What's the difference between the valuation of a tech company and the valuation of a traditional company? And I guess the question is quite common because a lot of women entrepreneurs in Nigeria don't necessarily do tech businesses. They run hairdressers, they run bakeries, they run clothing shops, they sell cosmetics. So they always ask, how come these tech companies get so much better valuations than us? So I'm going to answer that question in this presentation. So I'll just be introducing the topic with a short story. I'll be going over the characteristics of a software company. I'll be talking about network effects, and I'll be talking about software-enabled companies, and then I'll be talking about the importance of both types of companies for growth. So just a bit about me before we start. My name is Ola. I run HealthCap, which is a venture capital firm that focuses specifically on early stage investments across Africa in fintech and in health tech. In terms of my track record, my first fund that I ran returned 5x to investors, which places it in the top quartile of funds globally. So in the ever sort of evolving landscape of business valuation, it's quite common for people to understand what is the value of what I've built. Okay, I've built this big company, but how would it be valued in the market by somebody acquiring it or investing in it? And that's what I'm going to try and answer. So I'm going to start with a story about my friend's textile business. He runs a clothing factory which produces jeans, I think, in the north of Nigeria. And it does over $50 million in revenue. So he was asking me, why is Flutterwave valued at $1 billion when at the time that Flutterwave was valued at $1 billion, they had similar revenues. So Flutterwave at the time was making 50 million. He was making 50 million with his clothing factory. So why was Flutterwave valued at $1 billion? And he had nowhere near that. And most fintech companies, when they're valued at $1 billion, aren't necessarily even profitable. His jeans making factory was not only profitable, but had been profitable for about 7 years and was growing. So he was confused when I told him that his valuation would probably be less than $40 million, even though he was making the same amount of money as Flutterwave at the time, with healthy margins and a decade-long track record. So why are tech companies valued so differently compared to traditional companies? Why would a textile factory and a fintech company, both making the same amount of money, have one valued at $1 billion and one valued at less than $40 million? So let's look at the case of a pure software company. What I call a pure software company is a company whose product is their software. They're not using their software to do anything. They actually sell their software as a service, a SaaS company. And Microsoft is sort of the best example of an investor's dream SaaS company because it has unique characteristics that make it an attractive investment. The company's product is the software. That's what you're buying. And you have to buy it every year, so you subscribe to it with annual payments. And Microsoft enjoys high consumer retention due to the fact that the product is quite sticky. So you can't really get away from Microsoft. To do this presentation, I need Microsoft. To send a document, I need Microsoft. To open my email, I need Microsoft. To check LinkedIn, I need Microsoft. So it's a very sticky product. And there are substantial switching costs. So if you do want to leave the Microsoft ecosystem and go to a competitor, it's really difficult to convince your organization to do. It's really difficult to move away from Microsoft. What other alternatives are in the market? What else would you use? Then it has network effects. So a network effect is a product that the more people are on it, the more people are likely to be on it. So for a company like Facebook, for instance, or a company like Twitter, or a company like Instagram, the more people that are on Instagram, the more valuable the company becomes because part of the sort of intrinsic value is the fact that, there's lots of people on it. And Microsoft has a similar network effect in that the more people are using Microsoft, the more people need to use Microsoft because they need to send documents to each other. They need to communicate with each other. They need to hold their meetings on Microsoft Teams. So it becomes like a little sort of web that you can't escape from. So I've said that Microsoft, number one, unique characteristics. It sells its software. The software is a primary product. And the same software they'll sell to me, they'll sell to you, they'll sell to you without changing anything fundamental about the software. It's the software that they're selling. And that is something that you can't trust, you can't touch or feel. It's a software company. Number two, it's a subscription. So every year you have to pay Microsoft to sell you the exact same thing that they sold you last year. There's virtually no difference between PowerPoint 1997 and PowerPoint 2003. They're just selling you the same thing every year. You have to pay for it every year. So there's an annual subscription. It's sticky. Customers love Microsoft. They don't want to use the alternatives. And even if you try and say, okay, I want to introduce an alternative in my office, it's your own employees that will fight you because they don't want to leave Microsoft. It's a very sticky product. People get addicted to using Microsoft. And it has a network effect, meaning that the more people are on Microsoft, the more people need to use Microsoft. I can't escape Microsoft because nobody wants me to build a financial model in Google Sheets. They want to see it in Excel. In fact, in some offices, it's an abomination to build your model in Sheets. So in a lot of ways, it's a kind of software company that you can't get away from. And Microsoft's business has really high margins. So it has margins, high margins, because, what does it really take to produce it? What does it take to produce the software? The software is the software. And it hasn't really changed that much in the past 20 years, right? It's the same software. They keep on selling it to you. So obviously, it's very different from the kind of product that you have to make and ship out to somebody. Because when my friend in his textile factory is making the jeans, he has to buy material. There's no jeans without that underlying material. So every pair of jeans has a cost attached to those jeans. Because you have to buy the material, you have to buy the zip, you have to buy the button. Every single pair of jeans that he produces has a cost. That's not the same as Microsoft, is it? There's a point in time that they get to that adding 1 million customers, 2 million customers, $10 million customers really costs them close to nothing. Whereas my friend's jeans, to add 10 million customers, he has to buy a lot of denim, a lot of zips, and a lot of buttons. Very different business models. So the reason why tech valuations, particularly these pure software companies, attract such high valuations, particularly the ones with the features that I told you about, network effects, they're sticky, they're subscription-based, it doesn't take much to produce, and the marginal cost eventually gets to zero, is because unlike the factory, to serve 10 million more customers doesn't really cost Microsoft that much. But to serve 10 million customers, more customers, for my friend with the factory, he might have to open 10 new factories, buy lots of equipment, and then import the denim that he's going to use to make the jeans. And no matter how many jeans he makes and produces, he has still got to pay for that denim. Bill Gates is not paying for any material. He's the same Microsoft that is selling to me, that he's selling to you, that he's selling to the next person, that he's selling to millions of businesses around the world. That marginal cost, he doesn't have to open a new factory to sell to 10 million more people. So I've spoken about network effects, and this is something that we look for when we're investing in companies. And this is something that founders, when you're founding companies, should think very carefully about. Where a product gains value with more when it has more users, it's a driving force in tech valuations. So as the platform expands its user base, it becomes more attractive and more entrenched, creating a competitive advantage that is very difficult to replicate once a product has become entrenched. And remember, I spoke about Microsoft on the last slide. Microsoft is entrenched in corporate in the corporate world globally. Very difficult to remove Microsoft from what you're doing in your office because it has that network effect. So as a founder, when you're thinking about your business, always think network effects. How do I create this business where the more users it has, the more entrenched it becomes, the more valuable it becomes, because people can't move away. Now, what's a software-enabled company? I'll give an example of a company like Uber. Uber doesn't sell you Uber software. So you're not paying for the Uber software. You're paying for something that the software does for you. And this is a marketplace or a software-enabled model, which is a bit different. Think Microsoft, you're paying for your software. The software is the product. But Uber, you're paying for the service that the software gives you, which is very different. These businesses are typically lower margin, but also they're less predictable. Bill Gates can predict accurately that almost every business in the world is going to buy Microsoft software next year. I will buy it, you will buy it, we'll all buy it. There's nothing we can do. If we want to function in the office, then we have to buy it. Uber, however, might be able to predict that they have more rides at a certain time, maybe Christmas. They might be able to predict that maybe on Friday night, they might have more rides. But nobody is paying them a yearly subscription that is fixed every year and predictable. We use Uber as and when we want it. And it's not entrenched. In fact, if Uber prices become too high, I will use Bolt. If Bolt's prices become too high, then I'll use something else. So it has weaker network effects, less predictable recurring revenue, and lower margins because of the fact that in order for Uber to make money, something has to happen. It's not selling the software. It's facilitating a transaction of which it gets a percentage, a small percentage of the total transaction, which is very, very different from a Microsoft that is taking the whole money. It's taking everything. Whereas Uber has to facilitate a trip, and then the driver has to take a proportion of that, and then eventually they get a proportion of that. So, and Uber has major competitors. Careem, which it acquired in the Middle East, Ola in India, Bolt in Africa, and lots of these other different apps all over the world. So it doesn't have the same sort of, monopoly and entrenchment that Microsoft has. Airbnb, however, similar business model, using vacant houses, or making use of vacant houses. But again, Airbnb is more ubiquitous than Uber. So Airbnb is definitely more entrenched than Uber globally and doesn't have so many different competitors compared to Uber. But that said, marketplaces and software-enabled companies tend to have lower valuations and, generally speaking, more varied market influence compared to very successful software companies. So remember what I said about Microsoft as a pure software company attracting the highest type of valuation, and marketplaces typically attracting lower valuations because they don't have all of those really nice things that the pure software companies have. And then I'm going to talk about Netflix. So Netflix has something that Uber and Airbnb don't have. People pay every month for Netflix. Fantastic, right? But once again, and people are, in some way, shape, or form, actually paying for Netflix's software. So is it like Microsoft? Is this company, Netflix, going to attract a Microsoft-like valuation? Because people, in some way, are paying for the software. It does have some network effects, so the more people are on it, watching Game of Thrones, or watching Money Heist, or watching Ozarks, or any of their hit shows, the more people want to watch it, and the more people come on it because they want to see the show as well. So why isn't Netflix valued like Microsoft? It has the recurring revenues, it's sticky, it has network effects, and people are, if you stretch your mind far enough, actually buying the software product that Netflix produces. I'll tell you why. Number one, there's lots of competitors in the market. So in Africa, you have DSTV, you have something called GoTV, you have Iroko TV. In America, you have HBO with their own platform. You have Paramount Plus with their own platform. You have Disney with their own platform. So there's lots of regional competition, which means that it's not as entrenched as a company like Microsoft. In addition to this, Netflix actually has a very expensive business model. So Netflix has to produce and keep on producing new stuff. Remember when I said that I don't see any real difference between Microsoft Word 1995 and Microsoft Word 2023? But can Netflix pull that off? Can they show you the same movies over and over again and keep you paying? So Netflix has to produce new blockbuster movies every single month, new series every single month, and they have to use part of their revenue or profit to do that. So the cost of producing and buying content, I mean, what content does Microsoft buy? Zero. Netflix has to buy really expensive movies, or they have to make those movies. So they do receive that steady subscription income, but they have to grapple with costs that Microsoft don't in terms of buying content or creating content. Plus, they lack that strong network effect. So if they raise prices, people tend to go to Disney Plus or HBO or Paramount or DSTV. And they also have low switching costs. So it's easy for people to move over. And once there's a hit show on HBO, then people subscribe to HBO and forget about Netflix. So these type of businesses, software-enabled businesses, even when they have some of the features of a pure software company, you really have to look in depth about their costs, about their unit economics, when you're trying to value one of these companies. And also for founders looking at founding these type of companies, think very carefully about costs, about margins, about switching costs, about stickiness, and about competition, because that also affects valuation. That remains. But the fact remains, whether you're a software company, pure software, whether you're a marketplace, a two-sided marketplace or a three-sided marketplace, or anything in the technology space that uses software to deliver a huge range of services to a number of people, you're probably going to have a higher valuation than a traditional factory doing the same revenue. Because the potential for scale of a Netflix, for instance, is always going to be, or generally going to be, bigger than a traditional cinema. So there's a cinema down the road, and they show, about 3 hit movies. They have to pay for diesel. We're in Nigeria, so they have to pay for diesel. They have to pay for lighting. They have to pay for facilities management, cleaning, fumigation. They have to sell tickets every time. They have nobody paying them annually. That company is going to be valued very differently from Netflix, a software company that distributes globally in almost every country in the world from a single platform. I spoke about Uber that facilitates millions of taxi rides per year. That's going to be very different value from a taxi company that operates within Lagos and Ibadan, a traditional taxi company that buys its own cars. There's a hotel just down the road, Oriental Hotel, Lagos. Again, they have the costs of building the hotel, they have the cost of food, they have the cost of maintenance, cleaning, generators, diesel. That's going to be valued very differently from an Airbnb that doesn't own anything and just facilitates people staying in spare rooms and spare apartments. But even within the software space, there are things to think about. And definitely for founders particularly, but also investors, different ways of thinking about value, depending on the presence of margins, network effects, operating cost, stickiness, and absence or presence of recurring revenue. So, like I said, each garment that my friend produces has a cost to it. And that's very different to Ozarks on Netflix. No matter how many people subscribe to Netflix because of that movie, it doesn't change the cost of the movie. It just makes more money. So typically, valuations for traditional companies typically are more looking at the profit. There are different valuation methods, but typically they look at an EBITDA margin or a profit multiple. Everybody asked this question, so I had to add it to the presentation because otherwise the comments will be full of like, what about Tesla? Tesla is a car company, but compared to Ford, compared to Toyota, compared to Porsche, compared to all the big car companies in the world, it's valued like a tech company. Now, there is absolutely no disputing that Elon Musk manufactures cars. He has a factory. So why is Tesla valued so differently from all the other car companies in the world? Some people would say because it's an innovative technology, and intrinsic in the value of the cars is the value of the software that runs the cars. Some people will tell you that he has battery factories, which eventually will be able to sell and form the basis of the whole sort of electric car industry, and that should be taken into the valuation decision of Tesla. I agree with all of those points, but I also think there is some kind of influence of personal brand and track record in the valuation that your company can attract. I call it packaging. And anything Elon Musk does right now is probably going to attract a high valuation. So there is that software element. There is the element of, Elon Musk being able to talk about his battery sort of infrastructure and the energy infrastructure he's building. But also it's because he's Elon Musk. Whether you're running a traditional company or whether you're running a tech company, both companies are important to the economy. And like I said in my private equitization of VC video, private equity funds, typically their bread and butter is actually traditional companies. So you can still get funding from the private markets as well as the public markets if you run a traditional company. So in conclusion, software companies benefit from scalable business models, strong network effects, high margins, and traditional businesses face different challenges when looking for scale. So it's really important for both traditional businesses and for tech businesses, founders of both types of businesses, to really think about the kind of businesses they're building and the kind of sort of dynamics that will affect their valuations. I hope this has been useful both to investors and to founders. Thank you very much.